The pool smelled like chlorine and something older, ambition maybe, or the ghost of it. Amara Diallo had been breathing that smell since she was 4 years old, when her mother first lowered her into the shallow end of the Scarborough Community Center and said, "Just float, baby. The water will hold you." The water always held her. People were another matter. She was 22 when Coach Gerald Fitch walked into the Etobicoke Olympium and looked at the heat sheet for the national qualifier and said, loudly enough that 3 other swimmers and the volunteer timekeeper heard it, "Which one's Diallo?" And when someone pointed her out, stretching on the deck in her worn Speedo, he laughed. Not a cruel laugh, worse, a dismissive one, the kind you give a punchline that didn't need a setup. Her? She's training for the 100 free? He checked the sheet again, as if double-checking had ever changed anything. Tell her to save the entry fee. Amara heard it. She was close enough that she couldn't pretend otherwise. She kept stretching, pressing her forehead to her knee, and counted to 5 the way her mother taught her. You don't have to answer every insult. Some people aren't worth the oxygen. She didn't answer him that day, but she remembered. Here is what you need to understand about Amara before the story continues. She did not come from money. She came from a 2-bedroom apartment on Lawrence Avenue East, shared with her mother, Amara Diallo, and for 6 years, her grandmother, who prayed every morning in Bambara before the rest of the building woke up. Her father left when she was 3. Not dramatically, not in a fight, just gradually, and then not at all, the way some people dissolve at the edges until there's nothing left to hold on to. Her mother worked double shifts at St. Michael's Hospital as a registered practical nurse. She came home smelling like antiseptic and fatigue, and she still made dinner. She still sat at the kitchen table on Thursday nights and reviewed Amara's times with the focus of someone who had never swum a competitive lap in her life, but had decided that understanding split times was part of loving her daughter. "You dropped 2/10 on the back half," Amma said one Thursday in October, squinting at the printout from the club meet. "I know, Mom." "Is that good or bad?" "It's bad. My turn's still late." Amma nodded slowly, as though filing this information somewhere important. "Okay, so we fixed the turn." We. That word. Amara had held on to it for years. The Etobicoke Swim Club charged $380 a month for elite stream training. Amara Diallo paid it every month without complaint, but Amara knew what it cost, not just in money, but in the packed lunches instead of the cafeteria, the 5-year-old Honda with the cracked dashboard, the winters without new boots until the old ones genuinely couldn't be repaired anymore. She knew because her mother never said a word about any of it, and that silence had a specific weight. Amara had qualified for the elite stream at 14 with the second fastest junior 100 freestyle in Ontario. The head coach at the time, a soft-spoken Ukrainian-Canadian named Coach Billick, had called her the real thing and meant it. She trained under him for 3 years, improving steadily, learning to read the water the way some people learn to read a room. Then Coach Billick retired, and Gerald Fitch arrived. Fitch had credentials, 2 national championships as a coach at a club in Calgary, a philosophy that he summarized, "Often, as I develop athletes who are mentally tough enough to be great." What this meant in practice was that he had favorites, swimmers he believed in early, swimmers who got the good lane assignments, the individual feedback, the eye contact during drills, and he had the others. Amara was, from the first week, among the others. It started small. A drill correction given to the swimmer beside her instead of her, even when her form was the one that needed adjusting, a missed name on the timesheet. Once, during a particularly brutal threshold set, when she touched the wall first among the senior women, Fitch looked at his stopwatch and then at her and said, "Lucky split, don't get used to it." She asked him after practice one evening what she needed to work on to make the national qualifier cut. He looked at her the way people look at a question they've already decided is pointless. Your 50 split is fine, your start is average, your turns need work. He paused. But honestly, Diallo, the 100 free is a brutal event at that level. Have you thought about the 200? More room for your profile. Your profile. She had heard that phrase before, from someone else, in a different context, and it had meant the same thing then too. More room, more distance between you and the sprinters who look like what people expect sprinters to look like. "I'm a sprinter," she said. "That's fine," he said, and he walked away. She went home that night and sat in the kitchen after her mother had gone to bed. She opened her laptop and watched the women's 100 freestyle final from the last Olympics, watched it 4 times. Not the winner, not the medal ceremony, just the first 10 meters off the block. The start, the entry, the breakout. She watched until she could feel the sequence in her own shoulders, her own hips. Then she closed the laptop and went to sleep. She didn't ask Fitch for feedback again. She started keeping her own training log. The national qualifier was held in Calgary in February, which meant flying, which meant her mother rearranging a week of shifts and spending $600 on flights that Amara pretended not to know the cost of. Amara Diallo drove her to Pearson at 4 in the morning and hugged her in the departure hall. "You know what to do?" Amara said. "I know." "You've always known." On the plane, Amara sat in the middle seat between a businessman and a grandmother with a crossword puzzle, and she did not listen to music or watch anything. She sat with her eyes open and thought about the first 15 meters, the water, the wall. The swim center in Calgary smelled different from Etobicoke, drier somehow, the altitude doing something to the air that she'd been warned about but still found disorienting. She arrived at warm-up and found her lane. Fitch was across the deck talking to one of his favored swimmers, a tall girl from Burlington named Haley, who had gone 53.4 at the provincial championships and was, by most assessments, the one to beat for the national team spot. Amara did not think about Haley, she thought about her turn. She had been working her turns for 4 months, not with Fitch, but early in the morning, before official practice, alone in the lane at the Etobicoke pool when the lifeguard was the only witness. She had filmed herself on her phone propped against the kickboard. She had watched the footage, made adjustments, filmed again. Her phone's camera roll was 843 clips of the same 3 meters of pool. The heat sheets went up. She was in heat 4 of 6, not the final heat, the slower heat, the one they seed you in when they don't expect much. She looked at her heat time and calculated what she needed. Fitch passed her on the way to the far end of the deck. He glanced at her number, glanced at her face, and said, not cruelly, just factually, which was somehow worse, "Manage your race, Diallo. Don't go out too fast and blow up." She looked at him. "Are you going to give me a split target?" she asked. He hesitated, surprised maybe that she was asking in those terms. Sub 55 gets you a B cut. That's realistic. The A cut, the one that put you in contention for the national team, was 53.6. "Okay," she said, and she walked to the blocks. You should know what happens when a swimmer who has been underestimated finds the right moment. It doesn't look like rage. That's the part people get wrong. They expect fury, some visible transformation, a face that says, "I'll show you." What actually happens is quieter and more precise. It looks like stillness. It looks like someone who has made a decision and closed the door on all the alternatives. Amara stood behind the block and thought about nothing except the water. The starter called them up. She stepped onto the block, felt the textured surface under her toes, heard the crowd noise drop to something ambient, took one breath. Set. The beep. Her entry was clean. One of those moments athletes describe later and can't fully explain, when the body does exactly what it has been rehearsing and the mind is simply a witness. She broke the surface at a tight angle, dolphin kicked 3 times, felt the turn coming before she could see the wall. The turn. 4 months of 5 a.m. mornings paid themselves back in something less than half a second. She came off the wall with more speed than she'd ever carried through a turn in competition, and she felt it immediately, that rare, almost disorienting sensation of being ahead of yourself. She did not think about her split at the 50. She thought about her hands. She touched the wall. The scoreboard took a moment. Those moments last longer than they should. 52.97. The pool was not loud because most people in that building did not know who Amara Diallo was. But the timekeeper at her lane looked at his stopwatch and then looked at her, and the expression on his face was the kind that takes a minute to assemble, surprise, trying to become something more dignified. She looked at the scoreboard, 52.97, and a cut, a national qualifying time, by more than 0.6 of a second. She pulled herself out of the pool and stood on the deck, and the world felt very bright. Across the deck, Gerald Fitch was watching a monitor showing the heat results. Someone beside him said something Amara couldn't hear. She saw Fitch look at the board, look at her name, look at the time. She saw his face go through something. She couldn't name it from that distance, and she did not try. She did not walk over to him. She walked to the warm-down pool. Her mother was not there because her mother was in Toronto working a morning shift and would find out by text message in the break room at St. Michael's Hospital. The text Amara sent her was 3 words. "I got it." The reply came 11 minutes later, which was how long it took Amara Diallo to excuse herself from a patient room, walk to the break room, read the message, cry briefly, wash her face, and compose herself enough to type, "I always knew. Call me tonight." Amara sat in the warm-down pool with the water at her collarbone and thought about a swimming pool in Scarborough and a 4-year-old, and just float, baby. The water will hold you. It had held her. It always had. The national championships were held in Montreal in July. Amara had spent 5 months preparing, not with Fitch, who continued to coach her technically and had, since Calgary, adopted a tone of careful neutrality that was its own kind of acknowledgement. She had also been working, for the first time, with a private sprint coach named Dr. Omotunde Adeyemi, a former national-level sprinter herself who had transitioned to coaching and who watched Amara's race footage for 15 minutes and then said, "You're holding back on your underwater. You don't trust it." "I wasn't sure it was there." "It's there. The question is whether you're going to use it." Amara used it. In Montreal, the women's 100 freestyle final had 8 swimmers. All 8 were fast. 3 of them had Olympic experience. The woman in lane 4, a 25-year-old from Vancouver named Sabine, had the fastest seed time in the field and had been on the national team for 3 consecutive years. Amara was in lane 6. She had the 4th fastest seed time. The commentators, doing their pre-race notes, mentioned her Calgary time and described her as a potential disruptor. She heard it through someone else's phone as she walked through the warm-up area, and she thought, potential disruptor. People find the most careful ways to say they still aren't sure. Her mother was in the stands. Section C, row 12. Amara had found her on the walkthrough, and Amma had been wearing her St. Trive Michael's lanyard still around her neck because she'd come straight from a shift, and she'd waved with both hands like a woman who had never learned to be embarrassed by caring too much. Amara had laughed, actually laughed, standing on the pool deck in Montreal in the minutes before the biggest race of her life. That was the last, truly light moment before the gun. The final went like this. Lane 2 went out fast, too fast as it turned out. Lane 4, Sabine, was controlled and efficient and exactly what her seed time promised. Amara came off the first wall in the middle of the pack, which was where she wanted to be. Not leading, not chasing, but present, contained, waiting. The back half of 100 freestyle is where character lives. Anyone can go out fast. The question is always what you do when your lungs start asking questions your brain can't answer, when the lactic acid arrives like a difficult truth you've been putting off. Amara did not put it off. She went into it. She felt herself moving through the field in the last 20 meters, not dramatically, not like a movie, but incrementally, the way real things happen, one stroke at a time. She saw Sabine's cap at the edge of her vision. She thought, hands. She touched the wall. 52.41. The roar from the crowd arrived before she understood what had happened, which is how it works. The body knows before the mind does. She looked at the scoreboard, her name, her time, first place. She had won the national championship. She had broken the Canadian record by 11 hundredths. The swimmer in lane 5 grabbed her arm and shook it, grinning, already congratulating her. The swimmer in lane 7 gave a thumbs up from the water. Even Sabine in lane 4 pushed across and extended her hand over the lane rope. "Unreal," Sabine said. "That back half was unreal." Amara shook her hand. "You ran a great race. You ran a better one." She climbed out of the pool. The crowd noise was continuous now, a sound with no defined shape. She looked up at section C, row 12, and found her mother standing with both arms raised, lanyard still around her neck, crying in the particular way of a person who has been holding something for a long time and has finally been given permission to let it go. The press conference after the final was brief. Amara answered questions carefully, about her training, about the record, about what came next. A reporter from a national outlet asked about the path from her club qualifier to the national title, whether there had been obstacles. She thought about Gerard Fitch standing on a pool deck in Etobicoke, laughing at a heat sheet. She thought about the 5 a.m. mornings, the phone propped against a kickboard, the 8:43 videos. "Every swimmer has obstacles," she said. "That's not unique to me. What I can say is that I had people who believed in me before I gave them any results to point to. My mom, my coach, Dr. Adeyemi. That kind of belief. You build your career on top of it." She didn't name the people who hadn't believed in her. She didn't need to. Some silences say more than any answer. Coach Gerard Fitch did not attend the press conference. He had been in the stands for the final. She'd seen him, distantly, with the other club coaches in the designated section. She had not looked for his face when she touched the wall. She had not thought about him in the last 20 meters. That, perhaps, was the truest measure of the distance she had traveled. He sent her a text message that evening. "Congratulations, you swam a great race." That was all. No admission, no reckoning, no scene from a movie where a mentor finally acknowledges their failure and the music swells. Just 7 words on a screen, adequate and insufficient at the same time. She replied, "Thank you," and set her phone down. Her mother was waiting in the hallway outside the athlete area. Amara Diallo, in her scrubs and lanyard, held her daughter for a long moment without saying anything. Then she stepped back and looked at her the way mothers look at their children when they are trying to memorize something. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Amma said. Amara nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. "She always said you swim like the water is your home." "It is." "I know." Amma squeezed her hand. "I know it is." There is a photograph from that night, not a professional one, taken by a volunteer with a club camera, that shows Amara Diallo standing on the top step of the podium in Montreal. She is looking slightly to the left of the camera, which means she was probably looking at her mother in the stands. She is not smiling the performative smile of someone aware they are being photographed. She is smiling the other kind. The medal around her neck is gold. On her wrist, just visible below the sleeve of her warm-up jacket, is a small bracelet with a single word stamped into the metal. It was her grandmother's, brought from Bamako in a coat pocket 30 years ago, worn smooth by 30 years of wear. The word, in Bambara, means something that does not translate simply into English, something between persevere and the water knows the way. The photograph was taken at 9:47 in the evening. By that time, Gerard Fitch had already left the building. Some people cannot stay for the endings they help create, and that is all right. The ending happens regardless. Amara stayed. She stood on that podium and let the moment be as large as it actually was, instead of making it smaller to make other people comfortable. She looked at her mother. She thought about a pool in Scarborough, and a 4-year-old, and a woman who smelled like antiseptic, and never once made her daughter feel like a burden. She thought, "I did not do this in spite of what they said. I did it because I was always going to." That is the part they never include in the story of the underdog, and it is the most important part. It was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about being true to what she already knew, what the water had always known about her. And the water, as it always had, held her. I keep thinking about that moment on the pool deck in Etobicoke. The laugh. Not a shout, not a slur, just a laugh. The kind that doesn't bother to be angry because it doesn't think you're worth the energy. I've heard versions of that laugh before. Most people have, if they're honest. Someone in a position of authority who looks at you and makes a calculation in about 3 seconds about where you come from, what you look like, what category of person they've decided you belong to, and then acts on that calculation as though it were fact. Gerald Fitch didn't say Amara Diallo couldn't swim. He said she wasn't worth taking seriously. And somehow that's harder to fight because there's nothing to argue with. You can't correct a dismissal. You can only outlast it. What I find myself returning to is not what Fitch said, but what Amara did after. She didn't confront him. She didn't ask to be reconsidered. She went home, opened her laptop, and watched race footage. She woke up at 5 in the morning and filmed herself against a kickboard, alone, 843 times. That discipline, that quiet, unglamorous, repetitive commitment to getting better when no one was watching, that's the thing that actually changed her life. Not talent, not luck, not a moment of inspiration, the daily choice to show up for herself when the institution around her had decided not to. There's a cause and an effect in her story that I think gets flattened when we tell it as a triumph arc. The effect is the record in Montreal, the gold medal, the photograph, but the cause is moral in the truest sense of that word. It's about the kind of person she had already decided to be before any of that happened. She had the integrity to keep training honestly, even when her coach had written her off. She had the intelligence to study her own weaknesses methodically and address them without being told. And she had the grit, and I mean real grit, not the motivational poster version, to carry that work through months of being overlooked, underfed with feedback, seated in the slower heat, told her goals weren't realistic. Those 3 things together are what I think we actually mean when we talk about human character. Not the flashy parts, the private ones. What you do when there's no audience and no reward yet. And the evidence for continuing is thin. Amara Diallo drove her daughter to the airport at 4 in the morning and said, "You know what to do?" That sentence took 3 decades of sacrifice to earn the right to say. It wasn't empty. It meant, "I have watched you. I know what you're made of. I am not worried." That kind of belief, the kind rooted in actual witness rather than wishful thinking, is its own form of wisdom, and Amara built her whole career on top of it. Gerald Fitch sent 7 words by text when it was over: adequate, insufficient, and already irrelevant. The water knew who she was long before he did.